help you get through them as quickly as possible. I don't doubt the things that you have told me. I must add that, while science is reluctant to get involved with phenomena of such a nature, it has for a while now been less contemptuous than in the past. It is trying to restore these things to the realm of natural phenomena. For science, nothing else exists outside of the material world. Ghosts, science leaves ghosts to the believers, the mystics, and those imaginative people that today we call spiritualists. For science, only the body is real, this structure of flesh and bone that makes up an individual, and which disintegrates upon his death, resolving itself into the chemical elements that make up life and thought. Disintegrated. But soon the question is reduced, according to some, to knowing whether putrefaction, the disintegration of atoms, or better their organic function, stops instantaneously upon death, annulling individuality ipso facto, or whether it endures, according to circumstances, for shorter or longer time after death. You begin to suspect. And on this point science would find itself in agreement with popular belief. For the past 3 years I have been studying the folk remedies of old women, peasants, to explain to myself what their value is. Quite often they heal poorly what science doesn't know how to heal. Do you know what my opinion is today? These folk remedies are the remains, the fragments of an ancient secret science, and, more likely, of the instincts that animals are proven to have. From the beginning, when man was much closer to beasts than he is now, even he deduced the therapeutic value of certain herbs, and their use has perpetuated, passed down from generation to generation, as with the beasts. They still operate by instinct. In man, with the development of his faculties, this primitive virtue became obscured. But the tradition persists all the same. These old women who are more firmly attached to the practice have retained some tips from natural medicine, and I think science should be paying attention to this fact, because in every superstition hides something that is not just a deceptive observation of ignorance. Please excuse my long digression. Some scientists now admit, that is, with the apparent death of the individual, the functioning of individual existence doesn't really cease until all the elements have completely disintegrated. Popular superstition, for this is the word we use, has already defined it in part with its belief in vampires, and it had divined the remedy. Vampires would have a more persistent individuality than others in rare cases, yes, but it's possible, even without admitting the immortality of the soul, of the spirit. Don't look at me like that. It's a fact, and not so uncommon, that so-called popular superstition, or better said, primitive divination, could find itself in agreement with science. And do you know what the defense against the evil actions of vampires is? These persistent individualities who believe they can prolong their existence by sucking the blood or vital essence from healthy people? To accelerate the destruction of their bodies. In the places where this happens, the old women, the peasants, run to the cemetery, dig up the corpse, and burn it. It's proven then that the vampire has really died, and in fact the phenomenon ceases. You say that your child... Come and see him. He's not recognizable anymore. Louisa is mad with pain and fear. I feel I might go mad myself, or even be possessed by that diabolical suspect. But in vain I tell myself, it's not true, it can't be true. In vain I tried to comfort myself, thinking, and what if it were true? That's a proof of love. She poisoned him for you. In vain. I don't know, I'm sick of defending myself from a living repugnance, from this heartbreakingly violent distancing. Another one of his evil acts. He insists on reproach. I understand it from Louisa's responses, when he had her under his horrid spell, and the poor thing protested. Poison you? Me? How can you think it? Oh, we can't go on, my friend. For months and months we've withstood this torment, without saying a word to anyone, for fear of being laughed at by unscrupulous friends. You are the first person that I've had the courage to confide in, out of desperation, to seek advice, a way out. And still we would have patiently withstood everything, fooling ourselves that such strange phenomena couldn't go on for so long, if our little child weren't now in danger. You must burn the corpse. It's an experiment that interests me, not just as a friend, but as a scientist. Your wife, although no longer a widow, will be easily granted permission. I will help you in matters regarding the authorities. And I'm not ashamed for science, of which I am a poor lover. Science doesn't lose any dignity when it runs to folk wisdom, turning superstition into its prize. If you can then prove that it is only superstition in appearance, then science will be inspired to try new research, to discover unexpected truths. Science must be modest, good, while continuing its heritage of facts and truths. You must burn the corpse. I'm telling you quite seriously," added Mongeri, reading the doubt in his friend's eyes of being treated by old women or ignorant people. "And the baby, meanwhile?" exclaimed Lelio Giorgi, wringing his hands. "One night I felt a surge of anger. I hurled myself against him, following the direction in which Luisa was looking, as if he were a person that I could grab and choke. I hurled myself against him, crying, 'Go away, you devil!' But after a few steps I was stopped, paralyzed, nailed in place at a distance, with the words dying in my throat, unable even to translate themselves into an indistinct moan. You can't believe, you can't imagine. If you would allow me to keep you company tonight—" "There, you asked me in such a suspicious tone. You're mistaken." "Maybe it will make it worse. I feel that your presence might irritate him more, like having the house blessed. No, not tonight. I'll come to see you tomorrow." And the next day he returned so frightened, so defeated, that Mongeri entertained certain doubts about the integrity of his friend's mental faculties. "He knows," stammered Lelio Giorgi as soon as he entered the study. "Ah, what a hellish night! Luisa heard him cursing, shouting, threatening terrible punishments if we dare." "All the more reason that we must dare," replied Mongeri. "If you had seen that cradle shaking, so hard that I don't even know how the baby didn't fall to the ground. Luisa was forced to get down on her knees, invoking his pity, crying to him, 'Yes, I'll be yours, all yours, but spare this innocent baby.' And at that moment it seemed that my every tie with her was broken, that she was no longer really mine, but his, his. Calm down. We will win. Calm down. I'd like to be with you tonight." Mongeri went with the conviction that his presence would prevent the phenomenon from taking place. He thought, "It nearly always works this way. These unknown forces are neutralized by indifferent, foreign forces. It nearly always works this way. How? Why? One day certainly we'll know. We need to observe it, to study it." And in the early hours of the night it happened just like he had thought it would. Luisa turned her frightened eyes around the room, pricked up her ears anxiously. Nothing. The cradle remained motionless. The baby, quite pale and thin, slept calmly. Lelio Giorgi, holding back his agitation with difficulty, looked now at his wife, now at Mongeri, who was smiling, satisfied. Meanwhile they discussed things that, despite their preoccupation, managed now and then to distract them. Mongeri had begun to tell the story of a very entertaining trip he had taken. A good speaker, free of any affectation of scientific gravity, he intended to divert their attention, and in the meantime to keep an eye on them, in order to take note of all the phases of the phenomenon in case it should ever repeat itself. And he had already begun to persuade himself that his intervention had been beneficial, when, just as he had turned his gaze towards the cradle, he noticed it move lightly, in a way that could not have been caused by any of them, since Luisa and Lelio were seated far from the cradle. He couldn't help but pause and be noticed, and so Luisa and Lelio leapt to their feet. The movement grew stronger by degrees, and when Luisa turned to look, where Mongeri's eyes were involuntarily fixed, the cradle was rocking and jerking. "There he is!" she cried. "Oh God, my poor little son!" She went to run, but she couldn't, and she fell upside down on the couch where she had been sitting. Pale, her entire body shaking, with her eyes open wide and her pupils motionless, she stammered something that gurgled in her throat but didn't take the form of words, and seemed as if it would suffocate her. "It's nothing," said Mongeri, having stood up, squeezing Lelio's hand, which had come towards him in vivid terror, almost in defense. Luisa, at first stiffened, shook even more violently, and then suddenly seemed to return to her ordinary state, except that her attention was fully directed towards watching something that the other two didn't see, towards listening to words that they didn't hear, the meaning of which they deduced through her responses. "Why do you say that I want to keep hurting you? I've prayed for you. I've had masses said for you." "But you can't annul. You're dead." "You're not dead? Then why did you accuse me of poisoning you?" "Agreement with him? Oh." "He promised you, yes, and he kept it." "Pretend? We planned it all along?